Hello. We're continuing our read of Clive Barker's A to Z of Horror. Today is, I can't believe we're almost done. For Open Vein. Of course. Horror delights in dreadful pleasures, the things that are gruesome yet strangely compelling. Of all the dreadful pleasures, none is quite so dreadful or so pleasurable as blood. Some people have a thing about blood, its texture, its danger. Actually, don't we all? Since ancient times, humans have associated blood with the powers of life and death. Over the centuries, throughout numerous cultures, blood has been ascribed to diverse magical and sacred properties and used in a variety of ways during rituals and ceremonies. Some races believed that by drinking the blood of their victims, they absorbed the qualities of those they conquered. Its redness endowed items of a similar color with special potency, such as red wine, drunk by the devotees of Dionysus as a symbolic gesture of consuming the Greek god's blood. In Christianity, the red wine of the Eucharist is still used to signify the blood of Christ. Blood is a very basic substance, explains criminal psychiatrist Dr. Roderick Anscombe, author of the novel The Secret Life of Laszlo Count Dracula, 1994. There aren't many things in nature that are bright red, and that's why we use that color as a signal of emergency or danger. So when people see blood spilled, there's a very deep-seated emotional response that tells you there's something dangerous happening to this person. They're losing their life force. Blood is Life, says David J. Scull, author of the acclaimed nonfiction studies Hollywood Gothic, The Monster Show, and Dark Carnival. But the sight of blood represents death because blood is such a powerful and non-specific metaphor. I think this is why the vampire is such a persistent myth in human culture. And then we have some asides. Only be sure that thou eat not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. Deuteronomy 12:23. Before we do anything, let me tell you this. It is out of the lore and experience of the ancients and of all those who have studied the powers of the undead. When they become such, there comes with the change the curse of the immortality. They cannot die, but must go on their age after age, adding new victims and multiplying the evil of the world. For all that die from the preying of the undead become themselves undead and prey on their kind. And so the circle goes on, ever widening, like the ripples from stone thrown in the water. From Dracula by Bram Stoker. Opposite, we have Christopher Lee as Dracula. The vampire is a concept that can be found in one form or another throughout most of the world's mythology. It can be a mythical creature, either animal or human, or a reanimated corpse, the undead, that rises from the grave and retains its semblance of life by drinking the blood of others. In the Bible, there are numerous references to blood sacrifices and warnings against people consuming blood. Therefore, by drinking blood, the vampire directly defies the teachings of God. Unfortunately, there are also numerous real-life examples of people who have been inspired by the vampire myth to commit atrocities. Examples, perhaps one of the history's most notorious examples is the Countess Elizabeth Bathory, 1560-1614, the infamous Blood Countess, who allegedly killed more than 650 young women for their blood. The daughter of aristocrats George and Anna Bathory, she was born of the Hungary-Slovak Republic border and raised at the family estate in Eszed, Transylvania. As a child, she was subject to fits and range and uncontrollable epileptic seizures. In 1575, she married Count Ferenc Nazdi and took on the duties of managing his family estate. It was there she began her reign of terror by sadistically torturing her servants, often to death. The Count died in 1604, and Elizabeth began to spend more time in Castle Katish, once part of northwestern Hungary, and now located in Slovakia. In conjunction with two other women, Anna Darvulia, who died in 1609, and Erzy Marjorova, she continued to torture and murder. As rumors of her activities spread, an inquiry into her crimes was begun, and she was arrested on 29 December 1610. Her trial was conducted by Count Thurzo, an agent of King Matthias II, whose main purpose was to confiscate her large property holdings and so escape having to repay a substantial loan her husband had made to the crown. As evidence, a journal listing the names of 650 victims, all noted in her own handwriting, was introduced. While her accomplices were tortured and burned to death, she was sentenced to life imprisonment and solitary confinement. For the next 3 years, she was walled up in a room in her castle at Kashtis, where she died on 21 August 1614. Today, we tend to think of Elizabeth Bathory as a kind of female Dracula who lived in the 1500s, says David Scull. She was quite bloodthirsty, and her crimes fed a whole oral tradition. Then later, the idea that she bathed in the blood of virgins became popular, that she thought she could rejuvenate herself, actually become younger. 100 years after the trial, records were sealed. A Jesuit priest, Laszlo Turcosi, located the original documents and collected stories of the countess eating the flesh of her victims, draining their blood and bathing in it to retain her youth and beauty. Later stories would embellish her crimes, tales of vampirism and werewolfism. Bram Stoker, the creator of Dracula, 1897, read about Elizabeth Bathory in the Book of Werewolves, 1865, by the Protestant minister Sabine Baring Gould, and it has been suggested that her legend played a major role in the creation of his famous fictional vampire. The metaphor was very powerful, continues Scull, and these many writers of Gothic fiction probably came across these accounts. The image of the vampire as a bloodthirsty aristocrat who could prolong his or her youth probably owed much to the Bathory legend. And we have some asides. And the blood is the life from Dracula by Bram Stoker. After binding their hands, the servants would whip the girls until the skin of their bodies ripped and they became a mass of swollen wounds. The blood spurted like fountains, and the white dress of the nocturnal lady would turn red, so red that she would have to go up to her room to change. The walls and ceiling of the chamber would also turn red. From Bloody Countess by Alexandra Pisnarek. And there's a list of Elizabeth Bathory in the movies. I'm a gay man in a woman's body from Poppy Z. Bright. Big talent gives off thermonuclear vibes. I can feel them. The last time I said it, I was talking about Dan Simmons. Now I'm saying it about Poppy Z. Bright from Harlan Ellison. These cuts he had made over the years were more in the nature of experimentation to test his domain over his own malleable flesh, to know the strange human jelly below the surface, part layer upon skin, delicate layer of skin, part quickening blood, part pale subcutaneous fat that parted like butter at the touch of a new blade. From Drawing Blood by Poppy Z. Bright. And then we have some pictures of Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Poppy Z. Bright was born in 1967 in New Orleans. She has worked as a gourmet candy maker, mouse caretaker, artist, model, and exotic dancer. She began her first novel, Lost Souls, 1992, when she was 19, but it was not published until she was 25. She describes it as a homoerotic Southern goth rock and roll vampire tale set partly in New Orleans and partly in my fictitious town of Missing Mild, North Carolina. She followed it with a collection, Swamp Fetus, 1993, the erotic vampire anthology, Love in Vain, 94, and two further novels, Drawing Blood, 93, and Exquisite Corpse, 96. My teenage years were a difficult period in my life, she recalls. I was never happy in school. I was never particularly happy with people my own age. They thought I was strange for wanting to be a writer and for dressing the way I did. I started cutting my wrists when I was about 18 or 19. I did it with a single edge razor blades mostly, sometimes X-Acto knives that I swiped out of school biology lab. As for why I did it, it was a release of pain. It made me able to, not so much like myself, as feel sympathy for myself that I didn't have otherwise, because I was a great time of self-hatred and self-disgust for me. Seeing my own blood, using my own blood made it easier for me to get through this pain and turn some of this pain into creativity. When I started writing Lost Souls around this time, I already had such an intimacy with my own blood that it was easier to turn blood into a very sexual motif in the story, which of course is about vampires. I wanted to write a novel about Count Dracula the Vampire, says Roderick Anscombe, because although it is traditional and well-trodden path, the reality is so compelling. I've interviewed perhaps 100 murderers, often very soon after they've committed their actions. So I was interested in a man who commits murder after murder and wanted to bring my experience as a doctor and as a psychiatrist to this myth and to infuse it with reality, because as a psychiatrist, I have a professional interest in reality. So-called real vampires, people who drink blood for nourishment or sexual pleasure, are suffering from a condition that psychologists called hemotomania, according to author and critic Colin Wilson. The whole vampire legend is joined the great sort of confluence of horror and sex crime which flows into the 20th century. And of course, nowadays with serial killers and so on, we are again seeing a strange merging of the vampire legend with the legendary aspect of serial killers. Then I have some asides. Sometimes he would hold his arm over a page of his sketchbook, let the blood fall in clean white paper and mingle with fresh black ink. Sometimes he would trace it into patterns with the finger and the nib of a pen. From Drawing Blood by Poppy Z. Bright. Dazed, I watched her heart continue to pump blood through the wound for several more seconds, and it was not until the flow finally petered out that I began to realize what I had done. Gently, I pressed my lips against the soft surrounding edges of the wound and tasted the still unclotted blood which welled there. From The Secret Life of Laszlo, Count Dracula by Frederick Armstrong. And then there's a picture of Poppy Z. Bright. And opposite, Vlad Tepes, the original Dracula, from a German pamphlet published in Strasbourg, circa 1500. Although the Marquis de Sade, Guy de Rais, and even Ed Gein are often cited as vampiric criminals, one of the earliest reported cases was a German man called Sorgel, who during the early 19th century killed a man in a forest and drank his blood in an attempt to cure himself of epilepsy. Sorry, that was 2-page spread of Count Dracula in the movies, so I'm obviously not going to read that. A more famous case involved Sergeant Victor Bertrand, 1824 to 49, who was convicted of opening graves in Paris and eating the flesh of the corpses. In Germany, Fritz Haarmann, 1879-1924, also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, killed and cannibalized more than 20 people, while Peter Kürten, 1883-1931, mutilated a series of young children and women and then drank their blood. John George Haig, 1910 to 1949, killed 9 victims in London, drank their blood, and disposed of their bodies in a vat of sulfuric acid. In 1978, serial killer Richard Chase, 1950 to 1980, of Sacramento, California, drank the blood of his victims in the estimation that it would improve his physical health. As recently in 1992, Andrei Chikatilo of Moscow, Russia, was sentenced to death for murdering 25 people. And then we have opposite Bela Lugosi as Dracula. And side quote, the horror film in general and the vampire film in particular confirms the feeling. Yes, it says sex is scary, sex is dangerous. And I can prove it to you right here and now. Sit down, kid, grab your popcorn. I want to tell you a story. Stephen King. The serial killer is a vampire for the new millennium, says Poppy Z. Bright, the predator who feeds on humans. The vampire is usually seen as a different creature, a creature of a separate race or a reanimated corpse, whereas the serial killer is, whether we like to admit it or not, a member of the human race. One of the 2 serial killer characters in my novel, Exquisite Corpse, gets off on the texture of the blood of his side of it, being able to have his hands on it. It's in the last 100 years, said David Skell, there's been a tremendous 180-degree change in the way we respond to the image of the vampire. 100 years ago, the vampire was something to be feared because it was going to take something from us. It was going to take power. It was going to take strength. It was going to take life as represented by blood. Today, we want the power for ourselves. We want to be the vampire. The vampire is a subversive creature in every way, agrees Bright, and I think this accounts for much of its appeal. In an age when moralists use the fact that sex is dangerous to prove that sex is bad, the vampire points out that sex has always been dangerous. The vampire is everything we love about sex in the night and the dark dream side of ourselves, adventure and edge of pain, the thrill to be had from breaking taboos. The vampire is not only perennially popular, he is the only supernatural creature who has become a role model. I have an aside. I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good. From Dracula by Bram Stoker. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourneth among you eat blood. Leviticus 17:11 to 12. And then we have a behind the scenes of Dracula. And that was, for Open Vein. It's always nice to have a good vampire discussion. I don't know if anyone else watches What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show. Of course, the film is comedic genius, but the TV show is really good. Like I'm super happy that they made something that still had the spirit of the film, and expanded the universe. And I hope that more TV shows that are based on books or movies series, that they try to do more of that universe expansion. because we do have a Hellraiser TV show coming up in addition to a Hellraiser movie. So it's supposed to be going back to the original Hellbound Heart. And we'll see how it goes. No, that wasn't about vampires, but it was about Clive Barker. So next week is P is for Pain. Thank you for reading with me, and I will see you next week. Bye.